Just a quick reminder to everyone to continue to put in your questions in the Q&A box, and you send them to all participants, and we'll do the Q&A section at the end, so not after each section, but as we move into having all of our panelists together. So what we do next is that we would like to have a poll and hear from you on whether your organization would benefit from training or some other additional instruction on the impact to cargo due to COVID-19. So, for example, a lot of the information that you've seen is new, and so we'd like to understand from you how beneficial you might find that. Reminder to click submit to make sure that we can capture those responses. Similarly to this information being new to you, it also might be very new to employees in your organizations who actually have to operate under all of these extraordinary circumstances. So what we're trying to understand here is essentially whether you feel that you at this stage have the right tools at your disposal to help implement any one of these different procedures, or if you would benefit either from more training, be that e-learning or other, or some other form of instruction beyond the guidance that's been mentioned so far. So you've got just a few more seconds to send in your submit your responses rather. Poll has just ended, and if I could see the results. So it's along the lines of what we were thinking. As I mentioned, it's very new. It's new to most people, and then it's also very new to the organization as a whole. So many people seeing that it would be highly beneficial, or at least somewhat beneficial, to receive some additional instruction. So thank you very much for taking the time on that poll. We're going to move now into our next section with Mr. Gordon Wright. Gordon is our head of cargo border management, and he's going to walk us through some of the operational and, well, the ever-changing operational and regulatory landscape during this crisis. So Gordon, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Brendan. My presentation, really, in the webinar today, will be talking about three main areas that we've been particularly active in, starting with industry relief, then we'll talk about border and security, and then we'll finish with operational efficiency. So, Brendan, if we could go to the first slide, thank you. Many of you will know that prior to the COVID-19 crisis, the volumes of air traffic on the passenger side was increasing quite significantly. And one of the ways that was managed was through the provision of slots at busy airports. And those slots were provided to airlines, giving them a precise time and date where they could use that slot on the proviso that they would fill 80% of those slots in a given period of time in a given year. If they were able to meet that target of 80%, then those slots, those timeframes would be rolled on to the following year. Obviously, with COVID-19, the demand for those slots diminished well below 80%. Most conventional carriers were actually grounding their aircraft at that time, and so it was very difficult for them to meet their slot allocation, which had been agreed with governments, national governments. So IATA worked quite hard with national governments to work at ways that slot allocation was actually relaxed and wouldn't be taken into account for the coming year with some success. Now, I mention it in the context of cargo because that slot relaxation made it a little bit easier to get cargo slots agreed. However, there was a need to actually fast-track that slot allocation to make sure that the cargo that was particularly needed at this time, humanitarian goods, medical goods, medicines, and so on, could be moved quickly to those locations. So we've been advocating with states and with ICAO for that to happen with some success. Equally, we've been working with ICAO and states to reduce aircraft landing and parking fees. As many of you will know, airlines only make money when they're actually flying passengers and aircraft in the air. With many of the airlines actually having to ground their fleet of aircraft at the moment, the costs can be particularly high. And so we've been working very closely with ICAO and the states to look at ways that we can reduce those costs. If you're interested in more information on that particular item, you can go to the IATA webpage, and we've got aviation charges webpage on our website where you can get some more details. Moving on from that, onto financial measures by governments to support the airline industry. That was very key from the start. It was quite clear very early on in this crisis that airlines in particular would need financial support to get us through this crisis. And generally, the reactions of governments has been very positive in providing financial support to get us through this crisis to the end. So many governments have actually agreed that they will support that industry. The next step will be actually agreeing financial amounts of support, and whether it's within loans or other payback arrangements in order to secure those fundings. Again, at an early stage, moving to the next point, we were advocating for cargo flights to be exempted from state transport and cargo crew restrictions. One of the immediate effects from cargo-19, from what we could see, was that many borders were closed down. And with those borders being closed down, new restrictions were put in place to actually restrict cargo crews actually entering and leaving the country. And so we've been doing some work with ICAO and the European Union in particular to try and get some of those restrictions reduced and less cumbersome. One of the most practical things that we did, again from an early stage, was work with our international partners like the World Customs Organization to develop some guidance on medical devices, as well as the medicines and the personal protection equipment, to look at the classification of those at borders, basically to simplify them and make it easier for regulators working at the borders to classify those goods quickly, calculate any duties and taxes if they're due, and allow them entering into the country that required them, that was at particular risk. Moving to the next slide. Looking at border and security, those of you that are particularly interested in looking at what country requirements are during COVID-19, if you go to the COVID-19 webpage within IATA Cargo, you will see that we're tracking about 183 countries, looking at their requirements, whether they're issuing guidance, whether they're requiring additional licenses, whether they've got special provisions for the movement of humanitarian goods. They're actually all contained within that. If that information is of value to you, you might also want to look at the WCO's database for temporary arrangements during COVID-19, which is on their COVID-19 webpage, and that contains information on imports, exports, and transit arrangements, country by country. One of the main effective ways that we found of commuting of this ever-shifting landscape during COVID-19 was cargo border management bulletins that were focused on COVID-19 measures that were being put in place by governments. These bulletins contain information on statuses within the country, emergency customs procedures, amended security requirements, and we try and get them out as soon as the information becomes available to us. The circulation list for those is something in the region of 5,000. So if any of you are interested in receiving that information, you can contact us at cbm@iata.org to be put on the list for those. A key critical part as we looked at this particular crisis was working with other international organizations, NGOs, associations, and supply chain partners to make sure that we coordinated our activity. And what we could see from looking at available information with those particular partners, that information on things like trade recovery plans, best practices, guidance, and standards for COVID-19 was scattered throughout all those different organisations. So IATA took the lead with the UK Commonwealth Office to develop this trade facilitation repository. And that trade facilitation repository brings all of that information together and will be hosted within the next 2 weeks on the WTO's, the World Trade Organization's website, where any partner, any entity that's interested in getting that information, they can actually access that free of charge, use the search tools to get the information that they require. Further to that, as Dave mentioned on the previous presentation, safety is a priority for IATA and the industry, and security is too. And there can be no reduction in security measures that are being applied day to day. We mustn't drop our guard in that respect. However, we have got some particular challenges around that. For example, those who soon will have their security screening certificates expiring, or their training certificates requiring, or their station certification, security certification expiring. All of those come up on a day-to-day basis, and we've been working with regulators, the European Union, in other international organizations to get some transitional arrangements put in place as far as those security components are concerned. Moving then to the last slide on operation efficiency, some action that we took within the first week based on feedback that we had from airlines and other supply chain partners was it would be very useful to have emergency border contacts available for humanitarian goods that were crossing borders. We worked again with the World Customs Organization on this, and within approximately about 7 or 8 days, we managed to stand up this database. And if any entity is interested in having contacts in something in the region of about 70, 80 countries, if they've got border problems with their humanitarian goods, they can reach back to the Cargo Border Management Team, who will help them in providing some information that's necessary. In the European context, we've been working with the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, and the work that we've done with them has been particularly looking at arrangements for crew layover, personal protection equipment, how to deal with passengers on aircraft if they fall ill during their transportation. So we've been working with them to ensure that the guidelines that they're making available has been distributed. Equally, and on the final point, there's been a great deal of guidance material on health and for airport staff and border best practice and air cargo provisions issued by a whole variety of international organizations and regulators, and we've made that information available both on our website and through our bulletins to the whole industry so that they can track and follow some of those best practices and guidance being provided by the representative organizations. So with that, Brendan, I'll pass the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Gordon, for all of that really useful information.